All right. Welcome, folks, to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Pause. And continue pausing.
Oh, you want me to say anything? You said pause.
That was for me.
I thought you were doing a new thing where you were giving me instructions on what you'd like me to do.
This is my co-host, Phil, and shut up, Phil. Phil, stop talking. Don't talk. We have a lot to cover this week. In fact, there is definitely going to be a bonus episode because there is simply too much to cover for one main episode. And even you, especially depraved fans out there who every time I say that, the episode's like an hour and 48 minutes long. And you're like, there's no such thing as an episode that's too long. Even you will admit we could not possibly squeeze the following fights into one main feed episode. I'm talking about UFC 285, Jon Jones versus Cyril Gane. Well, that one won't take long. Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko. That one will take long, even just for the cackling. Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Jeff Neal. Mateusz Gamrot versus Jalen Turner. Bo Nickel did his thing, I guess. Not really much to talk about there. But Dricus du Plessis versus Derek Brunson. All right. Ian Gary continuing to look good against Song Kenan. That's all the stuff I want to talk about from 285. That doesn't even include Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili. And, is it on here? Yeah, that's right. We got Nikita Krylov, Ryan Spahn back. Thank God. Alexander Volkov, Alexander Romanov. Yeah. Oh, and Said Nurmagomedov versus Jonathan Martinez. All that's coming up. And Rafael Assunção, Davy Grant. That's coming up on next week. Finally, a good fight night card, and they just had to do it to us, cram it into the schedule right after a banger pay-per-view with a little bit of everything to talk about. So, I'll just say right now, head over to the Patreon. Probably in sync with this, there is going to be a bonus episode published there covering all the stuff we can't talk about today, which is mostly, I think, just going to be Jones Gane, Grasso Shevchenko. Maybe we'll squeeze in either Rakhmonov Neal and Gamrot Turner at the end, after we get to Petr Yan versus Merab Dvalishvili. That's probably all we're going to have time for on the main ep. Phil, are you ready?
I am. Let's do it.
Jon Jones, Cyril Gane. Let me just say, heavyweight is even worse than we thought.
It was one of the many things I found myself thinking after this fight, yes.
Yeah, because, I thought, my feeling on it was I've only seen Cyril Gane compete with heavyweights. It definitely skews your perception of his abilities and his, but I thought, as you said, people overrating Jones's chance to out-wrestle Gane, underrating his chance to win in a terrible kickboxing match, and probably the wrestling will happen if something weird occurs. And we did talk about Cyril Gane's at times questionable decision-making, and that likely being an avenue into the fight for Jon Jones. Wrong about the wrestling, or not, because something weird did happen almost immediately, which is Cyril Gane throwing his backhand. That was the weird thing that happened, which then introduced a sequence of wrestling and grappling, which frankly indicates to me that they should close the heavyweight division. Because that was not UFC caliber, technical skill or anything. It was, my God, it's less surprising now that Ben Rothwell was out there just submitting everyone, including the vaunted heavyweight grapplers, with the exact choke that Jones hit on Gane here, because you don't have to be that good. Apparently, you just have to sort of be able to grapple and not get tired right away. Anyway, what did you think? Jones Gane. It didn't last long.
Yeah, one of the unlikely outcomes from this particular fight was what if Jon Jones actually looks good?
Mm-hmm.
And within certain qualifications of the word good, he did look good.
Sure. Absolutely, he did.
He looked physically able to compete. He didn't really get hit much. He won. I mean, even if, let's say Cyril Gane's grappling didn't look unbelievably bad, Jones still won an early grappling exchange fairly clearly. He probably still could have converted that to at least some control or positional time against a better defensive wrestler.
Yeah.
He looked genuinely good.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, a bunch of people saying, what does this mean for his legacy? How good is this? I mean, and it does remind you that John Jones is a genuinely great fighter.
Of course.
He's racked up years of defenses. He's one of the few guys where, he turned up and you immediately saw he was an absolutely sensational talent. And has, outside of a few obvious caveats and weirdnesses, pretty much never failed to live up to that.
It's true.
He has, at least on paper, never actually really lost. Again, there's some caveats, but no one's ever actually really
he has
comprehensively
lost on paper.
beaten him.
He has lost on paper.
Yes, everything is you can be like, Mark Hamill and the DC, drugs test and various things like that. But, also the fact that Reyes and Santos probably both deserve to beat him. But
his official loss is not a loss. Pretty much everyone agrees. There are several official wins that are questionable. Several.
Yeah. But it's been a combination of sort of luck and consistency that has carried him through. Even just weird things. Like he managed to finish Chael Sonnen before his toe fell off. Yeah,
which almost gave me the most incredibly fulfilled prophecy moment of all time. Then Jones approaches the cage, and they're like, "You got to take that tape off your toe." He's like,
Just
"What?"
No.
And he said in the press conference, if they had made him untape his toes all the way, which apparently he didn't get approved, he wouldn't have fought. That would have been the most amazing turn of events I could possibly imagine. But I agree. I thought Jones looked good. I mean, a lot of people, even in the week of, they were all, I mocked his training partners. I didn't join in.
We all did.
I didn't join in mocking his physique. People were like, "Oh, he's got a gut." And I'm like, that's just what a normal big strong guy looks like when he doesn't have to cut weight. He's got a little fat around the midsection. In the cage, the man's back looked like 9 feet wide. He looked like Demetrius Johnson's back, but obviously on a much bigger frame. Clearly, he has gained some serious physical bulk that is not just around the midsection. And he absolutely swamped Cyril Gane. And it's unfortunate, I guess, for Jones that a huge part of the story of this fight simply has to be just how bad Cyril Gane's grappling and wrestling were.
Yeah, because that's the other side of it. I mean, because Jones, on the one hand, it is sensationally impressive to come back after 3 years away, or however long it is, after not looking very good in his previous 2 fights at all, then blow the doors off. I guess he's really the sort of number one contender rather than anything else is who Cyril Gane is.
Has the number one heavyweight list jumped to the top of your worst lists list, by the way? Because that's been a topic.
It's there's so many things. There's so many different things. It's a real tight race right now.
We're doing pound for pound.
Yep. Pound for pound is doing strong at the moment.
Pound for pound and GOAT and number one heavyweight are all.
Yeah, there's some bad lists out there. They're all putting in work. He's that's the problem with it, is that on the one hand it's an incredibly impressive performance, and on the other hand, I was trying to think, and Gane's performance might be the worst I've ever seen in a title fight.
Honestly.
I mean, if not the actual worst, then it's certainly, in a tier alongside the very worst title fights. Most of these have the distinctions of being held by dramatically underpowered journeyman who got who managed to rack up a few wins in an era where the title challenger the champion had cleaned out their division for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking. I mean, Chris Carriasso did a lot better than this against Demetrius Johnson.
Oh, absolutely. Lauren Murphy did better than this against Valentina Shevchenko. Like, yeah. Unless we bring the dreaded Namajunas Esparza into this conversation, which is its own special category of terrible performance, this is like the most embarrassing title fight performance I think I've ever seen. Yeah. I want to bring up, since we had him on the show last week, Ryan Wagner, he posted a nice comparison video on Twitter, which was an overswung left hand from Jeff Neal, which resulted in a clinch against Shavkat Rakhmonov, and then the overswung right hand from Cyril Gane, which resulted in a clinch with John Jones. Just as a useful comparison point to show that Cyril Gane specifically, and also heavyweight in general, are so much worse than the other divisions. What happens is Jeff Neal overthrows his left hand, feels himself going off balance, feels the clinch coming, and very quickly swipes that left hand through and swims it into an underhook. So that the clinch, he can contest in the clinch. Cyril Gane throws his backhand. Actually, it may have been a left. I think he was maybe in southpaw at the time.
I think it might have been a shift, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a left straight. He attempted a left straight. Let's here I have it right in front of me. Let's see. He throws a left straight, completely falls out of his stance, and frankly seems surprised by the fact that Jones steps into the clinch. He didn't know it was going to happen. Like, not only did he not, it wasn't like he wasn't quick enough to recover his hand and get an underhook in this awkward position. He literally was not aware that John Jones, having slipped the left hand, I don't think he expected Jones to slip it. That's an unusual experience for him, given his heavyweight competition. And then he was further surprised, and at this point already 4 steps behind, 0.3 seconds into the sequence, Jones gets to a body lock, and Gane, it's a complete rear waist cinch. You do not want to throw yourself into a rear waist cinch because you missed a straight cross. That's bad. That's really, really bad. And that just sort of starts just an avalanche of shit from Cyril Gane, because it's not only the wrestling and grappling, it's the bad striking and overall MMA transitional technique that allows the wrestling and grappling to be so badly exposed. The whole performance was bad from Cyril Gane. The whole performance.
Essentially the entire time he is trying to, since Jones grabs a hold of him, it's like Gane is trying to get up as though there is no one there.
Yeah, exactly.
Just crawling away on his hands and knees, and pushes him to his feet. And at no point does he engage with Jones's hands, try to pummel, try and do anything apart from crawl away as though there is not a man, large man crawling all over him trying to submit him.
Yeah.
Till the end, where Jones gets a submission where where the commentary team are like, oh yeah, this is pretty good for control.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be someone's gonna have to make some choices to get out of this. Oh, he's tapped.
Yeah. DC was saying, what did he tap to? Yeah. It was like the fist under the chin front choke rather than a classic guillotine. He just crushed his windpipe with his thumb, basically.
Darren, it's a Darren Till, Tyron Woodley kind of level.
Yeah, that's a decent comparison.
Yeah, where the person just gets absolutely thrashed to an extent that makes you think they're not going to be the same after this.
Yeah, and also,
people aren't going to look at them the same.
Yeah, and it makes you retcon their wins too. What does it mean that you got here when this is what you're capable of when somebody actually has the right game to test you? So
this was also, as you sort of alluded to right at the beginning, the final conclusion you get to is that you also think, my God, he looks terrible. And then you think about the division, and then you're like, but it almost doesn't matter, does it?
yeah.
Because even looking that bad, there's still only one fighter you would pick to capitalize on. Maybe there's two. I mean, Stipe. It's basically Stipe and Blades that you would pick to actually be able to capitalize on that in any way.
Mm-hmm. Stipe, Blades, yeah, I mean, maybe it makes a fight with like Sergey Spivak more interesting, but even guys like Spivak,
Oh yeah, Sergey Spivak for sure. I mean, after this, I would 100% pick him over Cyril Gane.
But like Spivak and Tybura, they're much clumsier wrestlers than John Jones, even a degraded Jones. Because it's not like, let's make one thing clear. The Rachmanov-Neal comparison is very good because neither guy shoots. Neither guy hits like a rapid shot off the missed punch. He simply ducks the left hand and steps into a body lock. There is a level change, but it's like a Dan Henderson shot. But it's a very quick reaction. And like even guys like Spivak and Tybura, they're much clumsier than that. They need to get to the clinch to take someone down, and they get to the clinch so awkwardly, that even they, it is, I guess, a useful reminder that John Jones is actually really good. And yes, lost several steps and probably lost interest in the last days of his light heavyweight reign. And admittedly, as we will talk about with Shevchenko, was certainly facing, while many of them seemingly like lesser opponents than the early days of his run, guys who had spent a long time figuring out how they were going to fight him and had a lot of information to go on. And that all of these mitigating factors persuade you, meaning us, that in fact John Jones just sucks now. But it's clearly not the case. I mean, he doesn't suck enough to lose to Cyril Gane. Let's put it that way. He looked strong. He looked like he knew exactly what he wanted to do, what he needed to do. He still did John Jones things. There was one point where he threw a right hand, and it was as bad as Gane's. It was worse. If anything, it wasn't even straight. And it put him completely out of position. But this is the thing. At heavyweight, Jones is one of the few guys who can actually capitalize on mistakes like that. And then quickly convert that to a finish that doesn't involve just like clobbering the other dude's head off. So, yeah.
I mean, when it comes down to it, you got to look at it. You look at the division. You're basically like, Curtis Blades would probably still beat you, but mostly, I think I've picked against Stipe, and I don't. This is the thing, is that I don't really. I think Jones looks good, but I just think that he's fully capable of still having dreadful slogs.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
yeah.
So much of this was Gane looking awful.
Yeah.
I find myself thinking, like, did Jones' pressure footwork look any better? Yeah, as you said, did his striking look much better?
No.
It was one grappling exchange that then, went on to show us that Cyril Gane really is one of the, the worst. The worst grapplers to make
one of
it
the
to
worst
a title fight in
grapplers
recent memory
in the heavyweight division, a category which includes 95% of the heavyweights in the heavyweight division. Yeah.
I mean, but even when I thought, John Jones fights are going to be slogs, I probably still would have picked him over Stipe just because he can kick a bunch and he's immortally durable.
Yeah, and you don't expect Stipe to be able to out-wrestle him. So yeah, he probably.
Again, I also don't expect John Jones to really get out-wrestled by anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so he probably just outlasts a guy like Stipe. He can probably outlast most heavyweights on the roster, if not all of them. So, people are just going to be shocked by this because we were wrong, Phil, and that never happens.
I know.
What this card did make me realize. I still feel I got, plenty of reads pretty accurate. This one, a huge swing and a miss. But what it made me realize is that the only prediction I got exactly correct, and I think the only kind of prediction I ever get exactly correct, is when a fight is going to be terrible. and that was Garbrandt Jones. Because every time I got to talk about it, I was like, this is going to stink. I'm just telling you, new Garbrandt, same old Trevin Jones. This is going to be trash. And on that, you know, chef's kiss. I was absolutely spot on. My finest prediction yet. Otherwise, we did not reckon with how ill prepared. That's the really funny thing is that, I mean, I acknowledged when we were talking about this, yeah, it's not like Cyril Gane has great training partners or a great training situation. I think Fernando Lopez is not a good coach. He just happens to have access to a pool of talent, and a lot of sort of exclusivity in his environment over there in France. But what really shocks me is that it turns out that like Walt Harris is in fact a perfect training partner for John Jones to prepare for Cyril Gane. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, if it had been someone better, they might have just thought this might not work.
Yeah, right. Like just cruising to victory and winning every round in his training camp was exactly what John Jones needed. So.
Yeah, he didn't overestimating Cyril Gane would have been far more dangerous than underestimating him.
Yeah, just treat him like he sucks as much as Mo Green. That shows us, I guess. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's take our first break. When we come back, Alexa Grasso is the new women's flyweight champion, and we are going to talk about it after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. I know, Phil, that diehard listeners of the show have been looking forward to this since the fight ended. Many of them told me so on Twitter. Valentina Shevchenko's reign of terror is over at last. And I gotta say, this is an unfortunate thing. I do think my sheer hatred for Valentina has definitely waned.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as
It's
not as satisfying as it would have been because this was preceded by Valentina being tested in a few of her title challenges. Like, if this was on the heels of her fight with Liz Carmouche, oh my God. This would be 10 minutes of me just cackling. But the thing is that Valentina being tested by bigger and stronger and, again, better prepared opponents who have spent more of their time in the UFC thinking about fighting her, when Valentina is pressed by an opponent, she is actually an interesting fighter to watch. And so I had already warmed to her somewhat in these last few performances. Like, I enjoyed her fight with Taila Santos. I enjoyed her fight with Jennifer Maia. Both of these women were able to, like, they made her have to fight for it. And in that position, like, yeah, somebody who, that's always been the problem with Valentina, is she will never ever put her foot on the gas or take a risk if she's already comfortably winning. When she's not, and she has to fight for it, she's perfectly good to watch. Looks like a good fighter, and the fights are pretty interesting, even if they're not like wall-to-wall excitement. And I thought this was one of those fights even before it ended. So I didn't spend this whole fight being like, oh, damn you, Valentina. I was engaged. I was interested. I thought Grasso did well.
Honestly, a lot of this fight, I found myself thinking, man, Erin Blanchfield's going to be able to build off a lot of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought Grasso looked good. She worked, it seems, specifically on a few of the things we criticized her for. And then Valentina had to fight back. She started landing good counters. Her jab looked especially good in this fight. And then she started doing what we expected, which is either allowing Grasso to close the distance and taking her down, both with clutch entries and reactive shots, or proactively closing the distance herself to get to that range. And yeah, it's because she had to be kind of proactive, because otherwise it looked like Grasso was kind of prepared to run her over if she was just patient and trying to counter punch the whole time. So yeah, I was really enjoying the fight. It's great that Grasso won. I like Grasso a lot too. And almost certainly we're going to get an immediate rematch. But, yeah, I wish it were more satisfying, is all I'm saying. I wish I could be just steepling my fingers and, after
what would have made it more satisfying? Would it have just been a comprehensive thrashing?
No, well, that would have been cool. This was perfectly satisfying. This was great. It's just that, again, if it had come on the heels of like the Carmouche fight, when my hate was really burning bright, when I was just incandescent with just utter revulsion for Valentina and everything she represented. So
I feel like Valentina simps are quieter now because they've become such memes.
Yeah, that's the thing. I saw Jack Slack was doing this. A bunch of other people were like really scouring the web for like pathetic Valentina fan comments, and they weren't really that good. I gotta be honest.
Mm-hmm.
The simps weren't that pathetic. And now I have acquired just enough simpness that I'm going to disappoint our fans by not just rubbing it in the whole time. So I don't know.
I did see you tweeted immediately afterwards, like, "Go on, Valentina, do the dance.
Do the dance now. I dare you." Yeah, but even that, I have to admit, if I had spoken those words, it wouldn't have been, full throated. Sort of, I was going through the motions, Phil. So, I'm sorry, everyone. I liked it. Let's talk about it. I'll work my way up to being really wickedly gleeful. But what did you think of the fight as a whole?
I thought it was surprisingly competitive in that maybe had it sort of tied up-ish when the actual finishing sequence happened.
Yeah, I think it was 2-1. On the scorecards, and I thought that, yeah, it was a good case for Grasso having won the round in which she finished Valentina.
Yeah.
Competitive fight.
Valentina wasn't getting her wrestling working anymore. So, Grasso, I think, had a number of good approaches that she took. We've been sort of criticizing her a bit for being a little bit one and done, and for not being able to close distance. And for this fight, she just had a little bit of like title fight Kelvin Gastelum in her.
Yeah,
because it was all just step in 1-2, and suddenly just looking at that, I was like, oh, Valentina's approach of just darting backwards out of range isn't actually like very good against someone who can cover distance cover distance quickly and hide one shot behind another.
Yeah, someone who puts their punches
really
together.
started working.
Mm-hmm. I will also say I thought that Grasso actually did a pretty good job, especially by her standards, of feinting her way in and disguising those rapid entries. With feints. Like, she actually did a good job sort of getting her feet into range before she made that final lunging commitment. Better than I've seen her in the past, but she also, I think the Gastelum comparison is great because she also just took a lot of calculated risks. Like, she was just going for it. She's like, if I'm going to win this fight, I'm going to have to step in there and throw 3, 4, sometimes more in a row. It was awesome. It's great to see.
Yeah.
And it made Valentina have to, seriously not buckle down and adjust.
And I think the big, obviously the big problem, and what we said was going to be the big issue, was that she didn't have she just didn't have the takedown defense to stop Valentina.
Yeah.
That was the sort of the big flaw in the preparation. Probably will be the big flaw which they will have to address for a rematch. I did find myself also thinking though that there is stuff for Grasso to build on in future, like with her like stepping in and attacking Valentina. I think she should be attacking her own takedowns as well.
Sure.
She did it briefly at the start of one of the rounds, and it didn't give her a takedown, but it did slow Valentina's pace down even further a bit after that.
Mm-hmm.
And, because as we said, Valentina herself is not a particularly good takedown defender. She's just in a division without any good wrestlers.
Mm-hmm. I'd also like to see the prescription for literally every fight after the fact. More body punches would not go amiss. From Grasso, get in with the same entry, and instead of the right hand upstairs or the left hand upstairs, just send it straight to the body. Makes it a lot harder to hit those reactive shots.
Yeah, obviously then there was the finish, which, as everyone now knows, Grasso had been training diligently for months. And, it goes to show you how much stuff which people do as something to put a little sort of flavor and difference into a fight can become a tick, which can become, a literal fight ending, a literal fight ending
sequence
hole to be capitalized on by opponents.
I see, yeah.
Because the Grasso camp was literally just like, she's going to do this at some point and we're going to wipe her out for it.
Yeah, they
did.
apparently specifically prepared and drilled leaping immediately for the back when Valentina did a spinning back fist or spinning kick. I think it was a kick in this case. And
that was cool as hell.
It was awesome. It was one of the most dazzling back takes I've ever seen. And you could definitely see that even before it came out that they were saying they had drilled that, I was like, that was prepared.
Yes.
That was not the reaction of somebody making it up on the spot. That was somebody who their brainstem feels the opening before they have consciously recognized anything. And it just happens. That was a muscle memory back take. Very, very cool. I also really appreciated that this was something I always like to see. This was a great example of why I think many, many more MMA fighters should not give up on the rear naked choke just because the person tucks their chin. That is such a typical part of defense. And it's, it's viable to an extent. I mean, jiu-jitsu players do this too, but getting your chin under the arm does not mean you're not going to get choked out. What really mattered there is that Grasso did not give up on the choke. She had the arm fully around the jaw. What she focused on at that point was completing the lock and totally hiding her hand behind Valentina's head. She had full back mount, and at that point, the new problem becomes, okay, my chin is between the arm and my throat. My chin is also being smashed into my throat. And I always invite people, this is one of those simple things you can do. Take your hand and press against your chin and press really hard and see if you can continue to breathe. You can be choked out essentially by your own chin if you tuck it in there and the person has a tight lock.
And the other thing that we've seen afterwards is obviously the picture of Valentina just after Grasso has released the choke.
Looking like an ice cream bar.
The upper half of her face is just crimson, and then all the blood has been squeezed out of her jaw.
Yeah, because it's just a really tight squeeze, and it's locked in perfectly, and it truly does not matter that she has her chin in there. All it means is that maybe it takes a little longer for her to tap. It's maybe less of a blood choke, more of a strangle. Doesn't matter if it's locked in as it was. Beautiful. So yeah, I want to touch on the topic which we addressed last week of Valentina maybe losing a step physically. Did you see any indication of that in this fight?
I'd have to go back and look at a comparison.
Right.
Because it's going to be hard to tell, I think, genuinely. But I don't think she looked particularly tired. Again, she didn't she still looked like she was punching and kicking quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's difficult to tell. I think almost certainly she probably is at this point to at least some extent. It's not like Grasso is the most physically overwhelming force she's ever fought.
No.
You'd really have to look at some side-by-side stuff to see, look at her and be like, was she getting tagged up by stuff? Was this fast? That was around this kind of speed before?
And it's tough to say because Grasso is, for all the valid criticisms of her boxing, she's definitely one of the very best boxers Valentina has faced.
Mm-hmm.
Valentina has feasted on a lot of terrible strikers.
Yeah, she's got really fast hand speed and a really quick step in. That was what happened to Joanna against Rose.
Mm-hmm.
So she was just like, yeah, I've just been beating up people who fight at range with me. She had a different approach to Valentina. It was less zipping backwards out of range and more just needling the opponent before they got in. But in both cases, they just fought someone who was kind of young and had been preparing them for them for some time, who just leaped in past their defenses and cracked them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I thought Valentina looked a little bit, maybe a tiny bit lesser. I did find myself thinking, afterwards when they were saying, "Oh, she was so humble in victory," and
was she?
She wasn't particularly.
She wasn't.
So humble in defeat. I mean,
but she was like, "I was winning very comfortably. I make one mistake. It is all about my mistake." And Grasso does, like she said everything except that.
This is what can happen. And you're like, it doesn't seem super humble. It just wasn't like she's the better, she was the better fighter or anything like that.
It didn't seem egregiously arrogant. It seemed about normal for a fighter, but.
Yeah. But it was also one of those ones where I was like, in the end, I think this was genuinely was either a 2-2 fight or it was certainly trending to be one, even if she hadn't gotten submitted.
Yeah, I think so.
And, definitely not what the narrative seems to be, that she was, dominating and then got caught.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Grasso won the first round. Grasso was winning a lot of moments in the other rounds and just couldn't stop the takedowns. And then a very good sign for her is that she stopped the takedown in round 4, stopped it really well. She was at the right distance, and it just seems she had seen it enough times. And this is the one thing that makes me think that maybe, we are looking at, again, it's inevitable at some point Valentina is going to lose little degrees of speed. But for all the beautifully timed takedowns she did hit, there were also a lot of shots where she was too jumpy, went too soon from the wrong distance, that people don't even think of them as Grasso stuffing the shot, because it was in fact just a bad shot from Valentina.
She was looking a little panicky at points.
She was. Yeah, I thought so too. She was definitely feeling the pressure from Grasso. And, in round 4, there was a stuffed takedown. Grasso did a really nice job sprawling, cutting an angle, framing, just killed it at the root. There was another attempt which looked like one of Gamrot's takedowns/knockdowns against Jalen Turner in the same round, where Valentina dropped to a knee and it just wasn't there. Grasso was just keeping her at distance. She was on the end of her punches still. So, yeah, I think there is plenty to build on for Grasso. I don't think this feels at all like a fluke. I thought she did quite well. She just
I think I'm much more likely to Grasso in a rematch than I would be, say, Leon Edwards against Usman.
Yeah, exactly. Very much so. There was a lot more to go on here from Grasso than just landing one chance shot. Yeah. So really impressive. And, I only wish I could just be more sort of evil about it, but, I thought both women fought a good fight, honestly.
Do you need me to find the quotes where Valentina said she was literally dominating the fight?
Yeah, do that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find them.
One thing I'll point out while you're doing that is we were anticipating the moment when DC would be just mystified that Valentina shot for a takedown.
Oh, of course.
He wasn't. Instead, he had a more charming sort of confusion, which he was like, I just don't understand why Grasso's takedown defense is so bad. It was kind of like nice. He was like, it shouldn't be this bad. Something must be wrong with her. Like, no, buddy, like, she's just never been that difficult to take down. And she's also never faced somebody who's this good at hitting takedowns. So that's what it looks like. But again, I think a huge feather in Grasso's cap that she did, seem to make the adjustments. Even in round 3, she was stuffing a few of those shots or just killing them dead before they even became wrestling exchanges. She was doing pretty well of maintaining her distance and making it difficult. And then she stepped in and Valentina timed a reactive double perfectly. And you can see when Grasso went down, like a look of momentary frustration on her face, she was thinking about stopping the takedown. She was aware. She was adjusting. She was just still in the process of making that adjustment. But I thought she handled all the wrestling and grappling sequences quite well by round 4. So I would have been very curious to see how a round 5 would have shaken out. I'm not confident that Valentina would have won a decision.
100%. Fight doesn't forget any mistake. Especially it feels frustrating when you was dominating all the fight. No excuses, only hard work. Need to start all over.
I love how often fighters give excuses and follow it immediately by saying no excuses. That is such a fighter-specific trait. There was a thing with Jeff Neal in the package before the Rachmaninoff fight where he did the exact same thing. He was like, and his excuse was completely legitimate. He had like sepsis. He was dying. He was in the fucking hospital. From like a staph infection. And he went through this whole thing talking about how terrible his health was. And then immediately said, but I could make excuses, but I won't. So, well, you had a good excuse, but you just
what do you
did.
think excuses are?
Yeah, I don't understand why so many fighters do this. But yeah, anyway, half-heartedly, but still, fuck you, Valentina. You lost to the better fighter on the night. And I think a completely valid and possibly reproducible win from Alexa Grasso again.
Sure. Might even pick her.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought, again, this was a good fight. I thought both women looked good. It had a nice momentum shifts, like pretty good pace. I enjoyed pretty much every round of it. So I would be very happy to see them run it back, even if it doesn't mean, unfortunately, Erin Blanchfield has to probably take another fight in the interim, but maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing for her. She just got a big win. Still obviously has some technical problems to continue shoring up, so let them run this back and then give Blanchfield the next shot. That sounds pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah, I mean, Manon Fiorot is out there.
Yeah, let her eat Manon Fiorot.
Exactly. On lines if she doesn't get onto title contention.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's take another break. When we come back, I think we're going to do Jan Duwalishvili and then touch on a few things from the 285 undercard after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about an upcoming fight now. Next week, a surprisingly stacked fight night. Truly our first of the year of its kind. It benefits from having a canceled main event added to the undercard, which is no longer a main event, and that makes it better too. That's how it goes, right? Like, Krylov Span as a main event is like the worst thing you've ever heard.
Can you imagine what rounds 4 and 5 of Krylov and Span could potentially look like?
God. Yeah. Krylov-Span is a 3-round fight to 3 down from the top slot is a good fight. I like it. Just shows how the context changes everything. I'm like, this isn't a fight I don't want to see. I just don't want to spend the whole night feeling that I'm supposed to be looking forward to it. It's not capable of making me excited in that way. But yeah, this card has the main event we're about to discuss, Petr Yan, Merab Dvalishvili. It's got a not completely uninteresting heavyweight fight, fortunately in the co-main event slot under the bantamweights. Imagine that. Volkov versus Romanov. The aforementioned Krylov-Span. Ricardo Ramos is getting a walkover, and Austin Lingo, who cares? But we've got Said Nurmagomedov, Jonathan Martinez, and then down on the prelims, Rafael Assunção, Davy Grant is a very interesting fight as well. It's also got Ariane Lipski, who's been looking good lately, versus JJ Aldrich. I like that fight as well. And Victor Henry, Tony Gravely. This is a good card.
Yeah, this is the one they've been saving, like, the bantamweights for.
There's literally 5 bantamweight fights on this card. Our question has been answered, Phil. Here they are. All right.
And not a moment too soon.
Not a moment too soon. In fact, several moments too late, I think we could argue. But thank God, this one will definitely be fun to talk about after the fact, which will give us another stacked week next week, because immediately on the heels of that, unless there's a week off, which there isn't, is 286 with the rematch between Usman and Edwards with Gaethje Fiziev. And a lot of other good fights on that one as well, including Marvin Vettori, Roman Dolidze. Goodness. So yeah, we are going to finally have a loaded schedule of UFC, my favorite word, content. But before any of that, let's talk about this main event. Bantamweights, hooray. Petr Yan, Merab Dvalishvili. Yan couldn't get past Dvalishvili's teammate in Aljamain Sterling. Then he couldn't get past one of the most insufferable men on the planet, Sean O'Malley. Where does he stand now heading into this fight?
Yeah, that's got to be the big question, right? Is that he went from being the anointed king kind of thing.
Yep.
Guy who was going to reign for some time in this division, and the one that everyone was picking, and so on and so forth. But then, like,
the crownless again shall be king.
Yeah, to being not even the number one contender.
Yep.
And having to fight someone that it is almost impossible to look good against.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting point.
I mean, this is Merab is the definition of the tireless, borderline immortal, like, guy who's a very good wrestler and also doesn't think enough to not be scared to throw strikes.
Yeah, that's something seriously in his favor. I don't think Dvalishvili is particularly intimidatable. And he also is perfectly content to just have a stinker, which, if he has his way, this very well could be. He will, he had that fight with Jose Aldo. I know many of our friends in the obnoxious hardcore analyst community, such as, I think even, didn't Ryan, last week's guest, we love Ryan, great guy, didn't he think Jose Aldo won that fight or something?
No, that can't be right, can it?
I know he thought Aldo won the Volkanovski fight.
Yes, almost certainly. But
yeah, that was a heartbreaker for a lot of Aldo fans. And, but no, Merab definitely won that fight and definitely won it in a horribly uninteresting way, which is something to his favor. He's not going to go out there and just make stupid decisions against Petr Yan just to have a fun fight. He might make stupid decisions. Merab's got his fare of insanely violent fights as well. But more often than not these days, it feels like he's going to go in there and basically try to replicate what Aljo did to Yan in the rematch.
I mean, I respect Merab a lot because he is someone who has a clear plan to go out and win the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And he's someone who will try his absolute hardest to win the fight. That is what he is going to do. He's not going to come out there and like try and do something cool or like waste time looking for a weird finish or do anything other than absolutely prioritize winning.
Yeah.
And depending on what shape this is what I sort of used to say about guys like John Fitch. Depending on what shape the fight takes, that can make for some pretty uninteresting fights.
Yep.
Because if Merab is already winning the fight, he's simply going to do what is already winning him the fight. And he's not going to stop, and he's not going to deviate, and he's not going to change.
Yep.
If, on the other hand, you start kicking the shit out of him, he's going to fight his absolute hardest to come back.
Yep.
He's not a boring fighter. He is simply someone who desperately wants to win.
And counter to, because that sounds a little bit like what I was criticizing Valentina for before, is that when his fights are boring, they are very proactively boring. He is not, he doesn't wait around. When they're boring, it's because he is shutting his opponent out of the fight. They would have to take a huge risk or something to get back in, and meanwhile he's controlling them. Yeah, and I'm not going to say I enjoy watching it when that happens. It does suck. But it's not the only way he can fight. And I think we got to give some credit here to the Cerro Longo team because, frankly, they are one of the few gyms who routinely does that. Like, they're clearly one of the best gym camps in MMA for giving their fighters smart game plans. Yeah. So basically, this fight could be exciting if Jan has to go nuts, because Merab will meet him. But otherwise, I mean, I sort of expect, we've seen more and more of this out of Merab. We know that Petr Yan is going to be happy to pressure. I sort of expect a lot of shades of what Aljo did to Jan at UFC 273. I think he'll probably float around and do a lot of circling. He'll do a lot of feinting. He'll try to work his jab, try to poke him with kicks, and get Petr Yan to overcommit, and then just shoot really, really hard and take his back. He doesn't have the grappling back take game of Aljamain Sterling, but he will certainly get to the rear waist cinch a lot, and usually does. And I think it's going to be on Yan to keep the pressure on and actually be able to stop those takedowns, which I guess this brings us back to talking about Jan Sterling too, because we were sort of two minds about that. We thought, yes, Aljo had a great game plan. He was super disciplined and calm, which was a huge surprise given how much he was visibly freaking out the first time, and all the shit he had to eat after the first fight. He was very calm and seemed like he knew how he was going to win and that it was going to work. But we also criticized Jan for looking really very cocky and seeming to sort of just disregard the fact that Sterling might be able to beat him even after it started happening. It took him really until round 4 to start consistently sniffing out those takedowns and making the correct decisions to not just instantly give his back when a takedown appeared. And I'm not sure what to expect here because, frankly, I thought Jan sort of disregarded Sean O'Malley in a similar way. Very different style of fight. But I don't think it's unfair to say Jan could have done more to win that fight. Another one where, yes, O'Malley looked good, but Jan also looked like he just didn't care that O'Malley was looking good. And I think that was a problem. Like, so what do you expect here? I mean, what is Jan going to do to solve that sort of conundrum of just not getting a guy in range until he's way too close and he's out wrestling you?
I mean, what I'd like to see from Jan is just him throwing less committed punches.
Yeah.
I think that's, really what you think of as the best parts of Jan is that him being a pocket operator who can take, small steps to get into range and, is quite defensively good at stopping punches. But I feel like his Sterling and Jan fights, his Sterling and O'Malley fights are mostly characterized him by by him like working his way carefully into range and then just going for something massive.
Yeah.
No, I thought Sterling was the more active feinter, as was O'Malley. Thought that, and yeah, in both cases, he just sort of worked his way up to where he thought like massive punching range was, and then tried to hit Sterling as hard as he could.
Yep.
Or O'Malley, for that matter.
Which is something he has often done, which we have angered people by critiquing him for, but it has finally, people have started figuring out how to punish him for it.
So, I mean, I would just like to see him working his way in with short non-committal strikes. Don't know how much he's going to be wanting to kick with Dvalishvili to, in order to cut off Dvalishvili's lateral movement. I suspect probably not. He's mostly going to be boxing with him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he just needs to work his way inside. On the other hand, I'm not sure that this is, for all that we said that, you know, Dvalishvili is a super like awkward guy to look good against.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like Petr Yan is a good matchup for him.
No, I don't think so either.
And I think the main thing I find about Merab is that he's proved his range kickboxing in a very kind of janky way.
Yes.
Similar to Aljamain's, really. He's just going to throw out a bunch of weird stuff from range. He's going to keep up a decent volume, but none of it's particularly, like, technically... none of it's particularly technically overwhelming or clean, but there's just a lot of it, and it's at different targets and using different limbs and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
His wrestling is, you know, very much of the Mateusz Gamrot, I'm going to try it, and if it works, hooray, and then I don't have a secondary plan to go to approach, where his opponents often just get up from under him.
This would be a great time in this camp if it's possible to make this kind of change, which it seems like it might be. Dvalishvili, we've definitely seen his style develop. This would be a great time to really, really focus on sealing those control positions. Because Aljamain Sterling's success, a massive element of that was just how good he is at taking and keeping the back. That he was able to bank entire rounds on the strength of one successful takedown. That is not something Dvalishvili has really ever done.
And that's the other thing about Petr Yan, is that perhaps less than being a bulletproof defensive wrestler, he's a very good scrambler.
Yes.
He's a very good defensive wrestler, but he's an astonishing scrambler.
Yeah. And Aljo had exactly the right read on when to catch him in those scrambles. And that's something that, Dvalishvili is going to scramble with him. Might get some success out of it, but unless you have that single-minded focus on securing the back the moment it appears, you're just going to have to endure scrambles with Petr Yan. Yeah.
I think the other problem with Merab is interstitial offense. Like, so the Aldo fight, for example, Merab spends so much of the fight clinched up with Aldo, you know, trying for takedowns, not getting them or anything like that. But he also doesn't do anything in the clinch.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people that he's fought have been either guys who are a bit like him, like Cody Stamen, who's just he's either out at range or he's wrestling, or they're just people who just want to kickbox with him, like Aldo Moraes or Dodson. People who have met him in the interstitial phases with aggression have often kind of been able to tear him up a bit in the clinch. Not just Ricky Simone, because I mean the Ricky Simone fight was mostly just insane
scrambles.
Yeah, scrambling wrestling fest. But like the one I find myself really thinking of as like maybe the closest stylistic analog to Yan is actually what's his face, Frankie Saenz. And you know what really started to happen in that fight is that Saenz just started kind of working Merab over in the clinch as Merab kept charging after takedowns because he's just not paying attention to what's happening in those phases. He's just too excited by the opportunity to grab someone and throw them, or the alternate, or the opportunity to break off and throw 4 punches.
Yeah.
And again, this is an area where Petr Yan is very dangerous.
Absolutely.
I think it's just that general question of Merab is thrilled to be able to dictate fights, but when people have met him with aggression,
yes,
he's struggled a bit. I mean, the Ricky Simone fight is barely a loss because it's such a weird ending. And you could argue that the Science fight was also it was only one fight before that, but he was definitely not as good as he is now.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I feel like those two things, his inability to control the scramble and his inability to fight interstitially, because it does sound like that's also sounding a bit Gamrotty, just mean that Yan is actually probably the worst matchup for him in the division.
I think it's a tough one. I mean, I think if we have this, I would like, this is a great opportunity for Petr Yan to have rounded out his game a little bit. To be himself a shade more like Merab, just taking small wins. Pressure, counterpunching, working his jab, stabbing to the body, staying at a good distance, and really trying to be sparing. But trying to be sparing about when he does those super committed swings, which he's almost certainly going to do anyway. But also just being more active with small shots in the interim, because this has been a problem for him. I mean, it was a problem for him in the Jimmy Rivera fight as well, that he would just sort of walk into range with his guard up. And against Cody Stamann, the real thing that solved that fight was that he could outpunch Stamann. Or not Stamann, Corey Sandhagen. That he could just outpunch him and just sort of accept 50-50 exchanges. However, if this is a fight where both guys show in and look exactly as they have in their more recent fights, I would still pick Petr Yan. Because I think that just a very straightforward, aggressive counterpunching approach is going to work. Dvalishvili, his striking is, as you said, super janky. I mean, I guess you could read this as the downside of being a very strategic fighter and having a very strategic camp. All the sort of particular techniques, there's not a lot of thought put into them. He is not a sharp striker. Even in his fight with Cody Stamann, he was getting run into jabs. He was getting countered with left hooks. I mean, Jan's left hook is going to be money in this fight. Marlon Moraes almost murdered Dvalishvili with a left hook. The way he overcommits on his strikes when he does commit, the way he overreacts when he's being defensive, reaches out both hands. The left hook is just a great shot against him, and Jan has a great left hook. And then, the other thing is, as you already pointed out, that Dvalishvili has never been a control-oriented grappler. And, going back to the Gamrot comparison, I mean, we talked about this last week, that maybe Gamrot would look like more of a control grappler, not fighting an insane grappler for the first time in a while. And, he did to an extent, but I think you could still see that it is sort of stylistically ingrained. You do this enough times, even when you get somebody where it's I really, really need to focus on controlling them, locking them down once I connect. Even if you spent the whole camp preparing for that, it's not like a singular tactic thing like Grasso's counter to Shevchenko's spin. That's not the kind of thing you just get on adding one muscle memory sequence. Because there's a million ways that Petr Yan can scramble, and he will continue adapting to scrambling. He even did it against Aljo in the rematch, where he started to shut down and win those grappling exchanges towards the end. So, I'd love to see Yan show something new. I think they would have to be relatively very minor adjustments, because even in these losses, Yan is still clearly one of the very best bantamweights in the world. But if he comes in just being Petr Yan classic, I don't really see how Dvalishvili succeeds in shutting him out of the fight. And if he can't do that, it's going to be a fight where Dvalishvili is the one getting hurt more. So
yeah, I think my only real caveat is sort of the one we alluded to at the beginning, is that I don't really know. It's hard to know where Piotr Jan's head is at right now. Because
it's been a precipitous
he had the
fall.
first fight with Aljo where he lost it due to being an idiot. He had the second fight where he just lost it. It was close, and he could say to himself that he was winning it by the end, but he still lost it.
Yeah.
Then he had a fight which everyone thought was pretty much a layup against O'Malley.
Yep.
And he clearly thought that as well. Where again, he just sort of kind of lost it, and wasn't even winning. Didn't even win the last round.
Yeah. Which usually happens. He usually at least starts winning by the end.
He's talked shit to Merab before. He's talked about how he thinks he's short and a zero and various other things apparently. And I mean, it's just like, if you're doubting yourself, you cannot fight someone like Merab Dvalishvili.
Yeah,
because Merab does not doubt himself one iota.
Absolutely.
Will have no mental lapses during the bout whatsoever.
Yeah. And even if your mental lapses come after you start crushing him, we have seen more than one person make critical errors after badly hurting Merab or gaining some momentum. And then, yeah, he is a very solid, very consistent fighter. And a great athlete who never gets tired also, which is a great thing to have against Piotr Jan.
If he's losing, he will simply try harder and harder and harder, essentially forever.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a great strength of his. So yeah, I agree with you on that as well. Knowing where Piotr Jan is at, you gotta think at some point the sheer overconfidence has to put a dent in it. The question then becomes, does that mean Piotr Jan comes in and is more disciplined and is really focused on banking rounds and winning exchanges in the best way possible? Or is this a guy who cannot suffer a dent to his confidence, who needs that arrogance? And is it going to be like a psychological version of, when we see a fighter trying to learn a new thing and there are growing pains, that maybe Jan could become a fighter who respects his opponents, but the first time he tries it, it might make him look much worse. That's possible. So, yeah, still a very, very interesting fight. I think all things being as they have been, Jan is a pretty safe pick, but there are very legitimate concerns about the trajectory of Jan's career and what mental state that has put him in. Because, as you said, there's really no room to doubt the mental state of Merab Dvalishvili.
And I'm picking Jan with a reasonable amount of confidence, but also with much less confidence than I picked him to beat Sugar Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to. And less confidence than we picked him to beat Aljo the second time. Each one, it's like, at what point is Jan going to start agreeing with us that maybe, I think sort of counterintuitively, if he comes into this still thinking, I won those fights, I didn't do anything wrong, he'd probably win. So I don't know. He needs to check himself at some point, but you're continuing to fight the best bantamweights in the world. When is the right point to start checking yourself if it is really a risky thing to do for what I can only assume is the first time ever? Because Piotr Jan has been, I think, an insanely confident and committed fighter his whole career.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one, isn't it? It's an amazing main event.
It's a great main event. On top of, again, a really promising undercard. So, finally, at last. All right, before we wrap up, we have to. It's going to make the episode long, but whatever. We have to talk about one fight in particular from the UFC 285 undercard. Everything else is going on a bonus episode. This one has to go on the main episode. Dricus du Plessis versus Derek Brunson.
The best thing is obviously we were talking beforehand about how Rachmanov against Jeff Neal was one of the best fights of the year.
Yep.
technical, visceral, violent masterclass. And then we're like, but what moment we talk about? We have only got one more to fit into the main episode, and we're just like, no, it has to be du Plessis Brunson.
Has to be, yes. Very excited to talk about Rachmanov Neal. Amazing fight. I think one of the for just visceral entertainment and highs and lows and action, it is probably the best fight I've seen all year. But this is kind of up there, despite being much, much, much worse. This is like a Peña Nunes level of good and bad at the same time. Perhaps because we knew how stupid it was going to be, and yet it fulfilled and even exceeded every expectation. It also featured, I just want to say this right up top, a corner stoppage. So bravo to Derek Brunson's team for, at the very end of the second round, they threw in the towel. They didn't even wait for him to get back to the corner. They're like, that's enough. And I respect that so much. I really do. John Lineker's camp saved him last weekend when his eye swelled shut. A very good corner stoppage, which the coaches came out and defended, as they should. And because idiot fucking MMA fans were critiquing them from saving their fighter. And this is another one where, yeah, I just want to congratulate and say thank you to the team for saving Derek Brunson from a worse loss than the one he was already enduring. It was a very good decision.
Yeah.
Speaking of good decisions, not many of them were made in the rest of this fight. It was one of the stupidest fights I have ever seen. It had everything. It had Derek Brunson just easily taking du Plessis down. It had a du Plessis takedown attempt, which resulted in Derek Brunson easily taking du Plessis down. There were a lot of people last week, I was very gratified to see, who went and sought out that quote unquote lateral drop in du Plessis' fight with Brad Tavares. People were enjoying our reaction to it so much they had to go see it for themselves, and not one of them was disappointed. This fight featured what I think was intended to be a reactive shot from du Plessis.
Well, the one where, like, Brunson literally runs him over like he's a train. Like, he just shoots into Brunson's hips, and Brunson just runs over him into mount.
Yeah, the level change in question was essentially like, you know how your balance is really bad when you just squat down on your heels? Somebody can just like poke you in the chest and you fall on your ass. This is what du Plessis attempted to do while Derek Brunson was just sprinting at him. And the result was not surprising. He just got fucking pancaked. So good.
What makes it so much better is that du Plessis continues. Like, you know, he's done it. I think he has talked about this fight afterward. And just now knowing that there's like this calm internal monologue going on the entire time makes it even better.
I know.
Just like, I kind of think of him like, do you remember that Robert Downey Jr. film where he was playing Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah.
He like calmly, before any of the fight scenes, he like uses his mental powers to predict everything that's going to happen.
Uh-huh.
Just kind of, and he's like, you know, he's like, discombobulate, towel, slip, lazy left jab, all this kind of stuff. I just think of Dricus du Plessis doing this, like in the fight, like calmly deciding what things he's going to do, like go for squatting, reactive takedown,
fall on your face,
fall on face, run across octagon, feeling punches, chin in air,
turn beat red. We're going to have to work on our South African accents to do more du Plessis internal monologue. Yeah, this was another one where, yeah, that's the thing with du Plessis is he makes an equal number of insane decisions and calculated decisions. And sometimes, often, they are one and the same. Where it is like a horribly sacrificial technique that he's going for. But he does know exactly why he's doing what he's doing at every single moment. It's very I've never seen another fighter like him. Like,
yeah, he's remarkable. Also, I found myself thinking at the end of the first round, I was like, Derek, you're fucking him up too bad.
Yep.
Get out.
Yep. I knew it.
Like,
yeah.
It was like the Cannoneer fight. I think because, last week when we were talking about it with Ryan, it was really that we were mostly fairly confidently picking Brunson to win, and then at the end it was just when Ryan said he is 39 years old. I was like, oh shit, he is, isn't he? He's 39 years old.
I will say right now, I did not want to pick Brunson, and I went through the exact same process with Zane on the vivisection, where I went into both, and the entire time I was just sort of becoming more convinced that no matter what happened early, du Plessis was going to win eventually. And both times, I allowed my co-hosts to persuade me that no, Brunson's going to easily take du Plessis down. Du Plessis is so bad at everything, and he doesn't make a single safe decision at any point in the fight. But, so as this played out, yeah, I went through the same thing. I sort of knew what was happening the entire time. As much as I also did not. I had no idea what was going on. But I was watching Derek Brunson's body language. First of all, he went for a guillotine early in the first round, taking a page out of du Plessis' book and just doing something he had no reason to be doing. But I also think another dynamic of this fight was that Brunson's pretty good at like controlling people and staying very heavy in purely wrestling positions. I think it actually worked against him here that du Plessis was so easy to take down that Brunson just like instantly ended up in side control over and over. Because then it actually tested Derek's jiu-jitsu. And his ability to, continue making good decisions and staying stable in that kind of open top position. And he's not that good at it. Like, he's good at riding people. He's good at keeping people in a, like, half broken down position up against the fence. If he has to just sit in side control, then du Plessis can be in there. Jack Slack was pointing out this sequence. Du Plessis doing, like, white belt jiu-jitsu shit. Like, getting put fully in side control and then doing what I guess jiu-jitsu people call an empty half guard, where you sort of, you're in side control and you hook your leg over the other fighter's leg from the outside. And I'm used to thinking of this as just a bad technique. And all the jiu-jitsu people who commented on this have confirmed that this is not what good grappling looks like. But Brunson allowed du Plessis to entangle his legs and just keep doing stuff, which allowed him to get half guard back, which then allowed him to build up and escape. And this is the thing, is that given the opportunity, du Plessis will always do things. And I think it's going to be very difficult for somebody to beat him with just control if they're not really confident in their ability to just maintain control, which Derek Brunson clearly was not and shouldn't have been, because he's not that good of a control grappler.
I think also it really was that just this happened in the Cannoneer fight as well.
Yeah,
that Brunson was doomed because he had so much success.
Yeah, exactly. A classic.
Because he emptied the tank in that first round. And so someone had quoted, someone had said something on Twitter, but they were like, like 10-9 Brunson. I think he also took a lot out of DDP's gas tank. It's like, yeah. Also, like, he doesn't need one somehow.
Yeah.
He's not like Merab Dvalishvili where he just doesn't get tired. He
gets tired almost immediately.
He just has a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and up to like 17th or 18th wind.
Yeah.
There's a part somewhere towards the beginning of the second round where he was just looking absolutely exhausted, and Brunson was touching him up a bit, and I was just like, he's going to start destroying Derek Brunson in a second.
Yep.
Because he looks like he's dead on his feet, and that's always the sign that Dricus du Plessis is about to start doing work.
Yep. Yeah, there was another fun commentary moment in this fight, too, where they were, like, pointing out how bad Brunson's footwork was. I think it was after the first time he got hit. They're like, oh, I think he's hurt. Look how, like, he's, like, knock-kneed and, like, stiff-legged. And, like, guys.
That's how Derek Brunson moves.
That's how he moves. Derek Brunson, I would love to see Derek Brunson just walking upstairs. I think he would look like an 85-year-old man climbing a simple staircase. He just has a very awkward gait. And it does not read as an athletic person, even though he is. He just has a permanently awkward way of standing and moving. But yeah, it was Derek was his own undoing, because despite several bad decisions, he was just, showing he has improved his striking. He doesn't have great defense. It puts him out of position, but he does make defensive decisions. He counters, and even his insane blitzes were relatively well chosen in the early going. And it just didn't matter, because every moment of success he was having was equalizing, bringing him down to Plessis' level of exhaustion, where only Plessis can survive.
Yep.
So.
And apparently they've been trying to book this, but they can't. And honestly, thinking about it, I don't know if there's a fight in MMA that I want to see more right now. Dricus du Plessis against Paulo Costa.
Oh my God. Especially the Paulo Costa who fought Luke Rockhold, who looked like shit.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I want. I just want the kind of raging bull aspects of masculinity colliding kind of experience here of Paulo Costa once again being forced to confront, much like he did with Vettori, but in an even stupider way in some ways.
Yeah. People were also talking about getting du Plessis Vettori. I kind of think Marvin might.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think Marvin would win, I think, because Marvin's too stupid to have any, for du Plessis to have any effect on him.
Yeah, but also just too, unimaginative.
Yeah.
Marvin's very...
that's what I mean. Other people, Costa would be, you'd be looking at du Plessis, who would be, turning beet red and heaving breaths,
stumbling around,
and then he would suddenly be horrified that du Plessis was kicking his ass, much as he was in literally his last fight.
Yeah.
But Vettori would just be I just don't think he's sentient enough for that. It would just be he's tired. That means he is tired. I will continue.
Vettori, he just doesn't have he doesn't have an ambitious style. So if you're out there making crucial tactical errors, which everything du Plessis does is a crucial tactical error, Vettori's not going to be out there being what is the best way? What's the principled way to punish this? He's just going to keep doing 1-2s and hitting takedowns. So I'm glad that what's the fight they booked Vettori in? It's coming up on the 285 card.
Did they book him
or
against?
286. It's Vettori Roman Dolidze.
Sure, whatever.
Yeah, I'm glad they went with that. I want just... I mean, I'd be happy to see him destroy du Plessis, but I do think pretty confidently, first thought, that he would win that fight. Du Plessis Costa, on the other hand.
That's magic.
Yeah.
That you could reasonably make... a case for a du Plessis title shot off that. Would it be a? Would it be sort of competitive malpractice to some extent? Kind of, yes.
He's got it coming. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, would Robert Whittaker deserve the shot more or something like that? Yeah, sure he would.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
do you not want
to see?
What
Dricus du Plessis flail and stagger his way to a UFC championship.
And then what would happen in du Plessis Pereira, assuming Pereira is still on top at the time? That is the fight where this is a man who will exploit your tactical errors singularly. You make one du Plessis mistake, fight's over. I would very, very much like to see that. And let's be honest, as much fun as du Plessis is, I think I gotta be honest, Phil, I find I'm a real African stuff to be quite off-putting.
Oh yeah, that stuff's it just handles it so poorly.
So poorly.
Because all he has to do is say how proud he is of Africa, right? Just don't negatively don't positively compare yourself to black people when you're saying it.
Yeah.
It's really easy to be man, I love Africa. It's such a great place. Say all the things that you love about it. Don't just be I'm a real African, and these black people are fake.
Unlike
Africans.
the Nigerian diaspora. Yeah. All these people who strongly identify with their African roots but do not live in Nigeria or Cameroon or wherever they're from. Yeah, that's like, I mean, some people, I think a lot of them are very willfully not getting why other people are taking umbrage with those remarks. Let me just put it this way. If I were to confront somebody who was a Native American, who was very proud of their heritage, who lived in France, and I confronted them and said, I'm a real American, you are not.
Yeah.
That would be iffy, right? Why would I do that? I'd have to be some kind of asshole. So just for those remarks, it gives me even more reason to want to see du Plessis just rocket up to title contention, because I think I know what would happen.
He would get 10-8'd by Alexander Pereira, left hooks 3 times in a row, and then shoot the most exhausted 3 rounds in a row even, then shoot the most exhausted, terrible takedown you've ever seen in your life and somehow submit him.
Oh my God. That actually might happen too. Jesus Christ. I think he would definitely lose, but you can't be sure with du Plessis.
You can never be sure.
You cannot be sure. All right. Well, I'm glad we got a chance to cover that. God knows there is just so much more pleasure to be derived from the Dricus du Plessis saga as it continues. Wherever it may lead, it will lead to chaos. And that will do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Again, make sure you head over to the Heavy Hands Patreon. We are going to be touching on a lot more from the 285 undercard, and maybe talking about some of these Jan Dwalishvili undercard fights as well. If not, we will definitely be covering those next week, where we'll probably have to squeeze out another bonus ep to get to all the interesting stuff, because again, we'll be sandwiched once again between 2 very good cards. So finally, we're through the doldrums. UFC cards are fun again. Thank God. And find us on Twitter as well, at Evil Greg Jackson, at Boxing Bush. Those are us. And that's it. Until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.